I don't know how you deal with the fact that freedom of speech went from largely harmless and more good than bad by far to absolutely lethal. And it's because our ideas can spread more easily over social media. So anyway, just keep that in mind, that this is not as easy a question because freedom of speech is not what it used to be. If one person can destroy a country, maybe you need some kind of control. There's a real big question on free speech, obviously, duh. When the president gets kicked off of social media and other people are being kicked off, I guess 70,000 Q supporters have been kicked off of Twitter. My guess is that that's the biggest reason for my drop. So I've lost maybe 50 or 60,000 users in the last day or so, few days. My guess is the majority of them were Q accounts or Q boosting accounts, so I don't miss them. I'll be happy to get rid of them. But we don't know what else is on there. All right, so here's my issue. When freedom of speech was originally built into the Constitution and it was part of our founding principles, you couldn't really hurt anybody with freedom of speech. Well, let me take that back. You could hurt somebody, but you couldn't take down the whole country. Because if you're some crazy farmer who's saying things that aren't true, well, nobody knows. You're just a crazy farmer talking to your neighbors. Maybe something could get in a newspaper, but even that's going to be local. So freedom of speech was basically a non-dangerous thing that had a great upside, like it would be a great way to bind the country and maintain our freedom, but it didn't really have a downside, except maybe your neighbor would get hurt or something. But it wouldn't destroy the whole country. But then you add social media, and suddenly an individual, let's say Tracy Beans, the perfect example. One person who did not have any kind of fame or platform at the time was able to become very large because of the magnifying effects of social media. And so her message about the Q stuff became big enough that you could argue it started a chain of events that ended in the attacking of the Capitol. So you can't say that freedom of speech is the same thing that it used to be, because now one person can bring down a country. One person. Just one person with a sticky idea and maybe some Russian trolls that boosted, and next thing you know, one person's free speech can bring down the whole country. Now, let's take this analogy. Analogies are not persuasive, but I'm going to give you some context. Most of you are conservative if you're watching this live stream. I think majority of you probably. And you probably also are big supporters of the Second Amendment, and you believe that individuals should be able to own weapons. But I'm guessing that many of you, if not most, would say to yourselves, a private handgun, or even, maybe a rifle that's got more killing power. Some of you would say, yeah, that's appropriate. But can you build, let's say, chemical weapons in your garage? And the answer is you can't. Because if you were to make chemical weapons in your garage, then you would have the power to kill, hundreds of thousands. So we don't treat the ability to have a gun and kill the people who are just around you, as bad as that is, mass shootings, etc. But it's still limited to where the shooter is. Whereas there are other weapons, could you build a nuclear weapon in your garage if you knew how? The answer is no. That's not legal. So we do already have a principle, which is we say you can have this freedom up to the point where it would destroy too much stuff. Right? So that's the way we treat guns. You can have freedom to have a little bit of firepower, but you do not have the freedom to have a tank or your own F-35, even if you could afford it. So, with freedom of speech, we ended up accidentally moving in the same direction as guns, meaning that a little bit of free speech is great, just like having a gun for defending your house. A little bit of things can be great, but too much firepower and you've got a new problem. Free speech that can allow one person to tell a lie that destroys the whole country, that's a different level. So, appreciate that the social media platforms, even if you don't like what they're doing, and there's plenty of reason not to like it, they don't have options. What the hell is the option? Should we allow individuals to destroy countries? If I put that question to you just that way, do you think a random citizen should have the ability to destroy the country even accidentally? They're not even trying, just accidentally. What would you say to that? Would you say, yeah, that's okay, let individuals destroy the country? I don't know. It's a tough question. So, I don't know how you deal with the fact that freedom of speech went from largely harmless and more good than bad by far to absolutely lethal. And it's because our ideas can spread more easily over social media. So, anyway, just keep that in mind, that this is not as easy a question because freedom of speech is not what it used to be. If one person can destroy a country, maybe you need some kind of control. But here's the problem. Suppose you accept, and I think we, as a country, not you necessarily individually, but as a country, we seem to be accepting by not resisting enough. That's the accepting part. We're not resisting enough to change it. So we'll probably accept that the president could be kicked off of social media for the reason that he was causing a dangerous situation. Now, I am somewhat famous for telling you that the slippery slope argument is not real. Meaning that everything has a reason to go to where it does, and then there's a reason for it to stop, and that's the whole story. Things that don't have any friction will happen, and then friction will appear, and then things will slow down. So the slippery slope thing I have not accepted as a concept, because unless you have a reason for the slip, don't expect it to happen. But if there's a reason, let's say an incentive is added for, let's say the government changed the tax laws, so if you get a puppy, you get $10,000 in tax relief. How many people would get puppies? A lot. You'd have a lot of puppies. So you don't need the slippery slope to look that when you change the incentives, you make it positive incentives, you'll get more of it. You make it negative incentives, you get less of it. And that's just basic, right? So, here's the thing. If we allow that freedom of speech can be limited when there's a physical danger, such as you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and now that's been extended to you can't question the reliability of a vote once it's been certified, because that would be dangerous for the country. What about the next topic? Let's say climate change. Suppose science, as is the exact case, believes that climate change is a gigantic problem. Lots of people could die if we handle it wrong. What happens if you say the wrong things about climate change? Because now we have a precedent. Can Twitter kick you off for having an opinion which counters the scientific consensus? I would say we've proven yes. Because once you've established the standard that as a private company, they can decide what is too much danger, it's not a question of free speech because they're private companies. It's a question of danger. Would you call it dangerous to support messages against aggressively fighting climate change when the scientific consensus says that's dangerous? I think you should expect that the situation is there's no resistance to social media kicking off climate skeptics. There's no resistance to that. Because we just watched it happen with Trump for the reason of being dangerous. It would be easy to make the argument that climate change wrongness would be dangerous. Easy, easy. I mean, you don't even have to work at that one. If you get climate change wrong, in either direction. If you spend too much on it, that will kill people. Because that's money that could have been used more productively somewhere else. If you don't spend enough, that's going to kill people. So if you're on the wrong side of that, how can social media keep you on there? Take any other topic. Let's say immigration. If you, depending on what policies you put into effect on immigration, does it not change the mix of danger? Suppose somebody says you can't let people, you can't do massive loose immigration because there'll be too much crime happening in the country. And let's say social media says, don't like that message, a little bit dangerous. So you just can't say it anymore. Or you get banned from social media. You can pretty much take every topic, because there's no topic that doesn't have a dangerous opinion with it. Almost every decision that's big that a government makes decides who dies and who doesn't. That's why they're big government decisions. These are life and death. Even if it's an economic decision, it's life and death, right? Because people do kill themselves if they have bad economic situations, etc. They have less health, good health outcomes, etc. So what I would expect is that literally every topic would become a question of, is what you're saying dangerous? Instead of saying, is it right or useful, it's going to turn into, is it dangerous? And every topic is dangerous, every one. So we have now created for ourselves a practical way to eliminate free speech, which is to give that power to the social media companies. Now, they didn't ask for it. It was just an evolution of their success. Once they became so successful, they effectively control speech. Even if the government says you can say anything, if social media says you can't say it on our platforms, well, then you're like the farmer in the field. You've been reduced to crazy farmer in the field who you can't hurt anybody or help anybody. So I don't see how that can change. And there was a survey on, let's see, some students were asked their feelings about free speech. And it turns out that a large number of students believe that freedom of speech is dangerous and should be limited. That's right. Students in school today, I'm looking for the actual number here, because I know I wrote that down, and I will find it in 1 minute here. Damn, I am really bad at taking notes, let's say. All right, well, I remember that it was a large percentage of students who said, oh, here it was. Large percentage of students in some survey said that they don't care about freedom of speech anymore. Now, when I was a student, I was taught that freedom of speech is the bedrock right, and that if you don't have freedom of speech, even for unpopular ideas, that you're guaranteed you will lose your country. If you're a certain age, were you taught that? That without free speech, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose everything. That's what I was taught. Apparently, that is not what's being taught today. Today what's being taught is that free speech is actually dangerous because it would be discriminatory toward minorities, and it would be bullying and all those things. And by the way, those things are all true. It is bullying, etc. Oh, here's the statistic. Nearly 40% of students believe government should restrict the speech of climate change deniers. So the very thing I was talking about. So at the moment, right now, in this UW-Madison students survey, 40% of them say the government should restrict the speech of climate change deniers. Why? Because they think climate change deniers are dangerous. If you apply that standard, that's the end of the country. And we are. So we're on a path which, if we stayed on it, would guarantee the end of the country. I don't think there's any other way it could go. Now, my expectation is there'll be counter forces and, too many things to predict. So I don't think things go in a straight line. And I'm actually not worried that it's going to go that way. I think we'll find a way to correct. But at the moment, the way we're training students, apparently, is to not think that free speech is good, and rather that it is bad. Now, whose fault would that be? Do you know what I'm going to say next? Whose fault is it that students are being taught to destroy their own country? Because that's what would happen. If you treat free speech as a danger, you're teaching the students to destroy the country. It's the teachers' unions. Always. The teachers' unions. It's the teachers' unions that decide what the students are saying or not saying. They eliminate competition because they have so much power, so there's no other voices. The teachers' unions are destroying the country. Unambiguously, right in front of you, no doubt about it. The teachers' unions are destroying the country. Now, when I say that I'm an optimist and I believe that we'll figure out ways to adjust, that would be the first way. The first way to adjust would be to either parents just massively taking their kids out of school. That could happen. To teach them at home or something. But I think the teachers' unions pretty much have a reckoning coming. I don't know what that will look like. James Todaro, MD, made this observation today. He said in 2019, he said this on Twitter, in 2019 the courts ruled that Trump was not allowed to block critics on Twitter because it was, quote, unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination. So we know that the president would not be allowed to block people. Now, of course, the president is the government, and free speech is a question of government, not a question of individual private companies. But in 2021, Amazon, Apple, Google, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, Twitch, Snapchat, and Discord are given carte blanche to discriminate away. So the president was not allowed to block people because it would block free speech, but the private companies are explicitly allowed to do exactly that with all the same bad outcomes because they're private companies. So, wow. So here's some other examples of things that you know are going to become questions of not free speech, but a question of whether you can say something that might be dangerous. Could you speak out about pro-gun rights if the standard is you don't want to say things that could get people hurt? No, you couldn't say pro-gun stuff. You won't be able to talk about religious affiliations, probably. The food pyramid. Think about the food pyramid, which was completely bad science. The government put out the food pyramid. Could you criticize the food pyramid? Under current guidelines, the private companies could throw you off for being correct in criticizing the food pyramid. You would have been correct. Now, time has proven that you'd be correct, so that's not controversial. We now know that the food pyramid was, in fact, not science. But if you had said that, could people have said, well, you're going to cause people to eat poorly with your bad science, so therefore that's dangerous? Can't talk about that. I think that's where it's going.